During this webinar, we may speak about forward-facing features that are in pilot or beta. Please make all your implementation, purchasing, and investment decisions based on what we have available now. Now let's get started with today's session with our team. Get ready for your PD1 certification.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Alba Rivas. I am a lead developer evangelist at Salesforce, and this is my Twitter username in case that you want to follow me later.
Hello, I'm Annie. I am a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. My Twitter handle is @AnnieHehe.
Hi there, I'm Belinda Adams. I'm a credential developer on the credentialing team of Trailhead. Follow me at BelindaAdams_SF.
So let's start with the webinar. What are you going to learn in this session? First, we are going to explain to you the benefits of becoming Platform Developer 1 certified. Then, Belinda will explain how exams are structured and how questions are designed. Annie and I will give you an overview of the exam content, going through all the exam guide topics. And finally, we will share some resources and next steps. Studying for certifications is one of the best ways to learn. You will discover new features that you didn't know about before, for example, a formula function that may save you ages. Certifications are resume-worthy credentials. This is, you can add them to your LinkedIn, CV, or resume and prove to others that you are a Salesforce developer rockstar. Certifications are good for your company too. Companies that have certified developers are much more trustworthy for the industry. And finally, certifications will allow you to connect to other developers that are preparing the same exams as you. So definitely, certifications are your first step towards your Salesforce developer dream job.
Well, I hope everyone's excited about the opportunities that certification can offer. In this segment, we're going to cover a bit about how we build our certifications and why this is relevant when you're thinking about getting certified. And we're also going to talk about the specific format around the Platform Developer 1 exam. When building an exam, we work closely with subject matter experts, SMEs for short, from start to finish. The first step in the process is to define the target audience description. The Salesforce certification exams all center around job roles. So the target audience for an exam is someone who's actually performing in the job, and we need to determine which skills this person needs to demonstrate. When doing this, it's important to keep in mind that certification exams are scored on a pass-fail basis. This is really interesting because learning, knowledge, skills all build on a continuum, and the exam itself is focused on one specific point. We target the exam for the audience that has the minimal level of competence that's needed to satisfactorily work in the domain. The term in the industry for this is minimally qualified candidate. This means that the target audience is not the person who can score 100% on the exam. You do not need to be an expert, but instead you need to be able to actually perform the job. So if you're on the webinar today, there's a good chance that this minimally qualified candidate description actually describes you. Coming out of the first step, we know what the job role entails and the work skills that the target candidate needs to have. During the job task analysis, we're going to go to a deeper level. We break down the broader skills into discrete tasks, and we analyze which tasks are most important within the job role. These are then further organized into weighted sections and objectives for the exam, and you can see these represented in all of our exam guides. We refer to this weighted and organized structure as the exam blueprint, and it's used by our SMEs again when they write the exam questions. We train the SMEs in the standards and best practices for writing test questions, and the blueprint tells them how many questions to write and the level or type of questions that are needed for each objective. Again, since we focus on doing skills that are required within the job, our exam questions are going to test on the application of knowledge and not on memorization. For example, in Platform Developer 1, you're going to see scenarios and code blocks that are presented, and you need to analyze these in order to answer the question that's being posed. After the questions are written, there are multiple iterations of editing and technical review, and then the questions are put out on a beta test format. Watch for these beta tests on social, and if you're C1 offered when you're preparing for a certification, this is a great way to try out the exam questions for free and to provide feedback to us in the development team. Also, if you pass, your result counts towards certification, so it can be a win-win all the way around. After the beta, we go through all the feedback. We look at the statistics of how each item performed. Did the question actually measure the test taker's skills and determine if they are competent to go out and practice in this job? We select the best performing questions for the live exam, and we work with SMEs to set the correct passing score based on the questions and on that minimally qualified candidate description. The end result of all of these steps is a certification exam that accurately determines if a person has the skills to go out and do the job. Let's look now at specific details around the Platform Developer 1 exam. The exam is comprised of 60 multiple choice and multiple select questions. Multiple choice questions have one correct answer, and multiple select questions have either 2 or 3 correct answers. The number of answers is always indicated within the question, and the testing interface also monitors this. For multiple select questions, you need to get all the answer options correct in order to score the question as correct. There's no partial credit given. The exam is delivered in a proctored environment, either in a testing center or via remote proctoring. You have 110 minutes for the 60 questions. So you can go through the questions at a comfortable pace, and you have time to go back for a review as well. The cost is $200 plus tax for the first try, but only half of that price should you need to retake. For scoring, you need to achieve a score of 65% to pass the exam, and this equates to getting 39 of those 60 questions correct. At the end of the exam, you're going to receive section level feedback showing how you did on each section. This information is going to be stored in your Web Assessor account, so it's useful to go back and review at a later time if you want to. Platform Developer 1 is our entry-level developer certification, so there are no formal prerequisite certifications, but we do recommend that you have 1 to 2 years of developer experience and specifically 6 months on the Lightning platform. The platform developer is focused primarily on programmatically extending the capabilities of the Lightning platform. The exam is divided into the 6 sections that you see represented around the circle here. The majority of the sections are weighted between 10 to 12% of the exam, so 6 or 7 questions each. However, the logic and process automation section is a big topic. It has a lot of objectives underneath it. So this section alone represents 46% of the exam. Be sure to spend ample time on this as you prepare. For more detailed information about this, you can pull up the exam guide from the Credentials tab on Trailhead. And now Annie and Alba are going to talk about how you can prepare for each of these topics in more detail.
Awesome. So I'll start with the first 3 topics. First, we'll start with the Salesforce fundamentals, which covers for about 10% of the exam. You may be curious what is covered under Salesforce fundamentals. Well, Salesforce fundamentals covers the fundamentals of developing on the Lightning platform. You may be curious about what is a Lightning platform. The Lightning platform is provided by Salesforce to enable you, the developer, to create custom applications and experiences. So you can see there's lots of products and lots of tools in the Lightning platform. Specifically, what will be covered on the exam is outlined in red. You'll need to know some declarative tools such as Process Builder and Workflow. In the UI layer, you need to know how to create Aura bundles and how to create Visualforce pages. In the abstraction layer, you need to know how to fetch metadata using Apex, how to design data models, and what are the limits around developing on a multi-tenant environment. If you are an expert, or if you're really confident with your declarative customization skills, you can also consider the App Builder exam, which is a separate exam. All right, we're just going to go over a sample of topics today. Not going to cover every single topic in this webinar. So a sample of topic for Salesforce fundamentals is what are the considerations of developing on a multi-tenant environment? The correct answer will include a combination of limits for DML operations, data manipulation language, limits around SQL queries, and or governor limits. Alba will go into the governor limits later in this webinar. Another sample topic would be how does Salesforce platform features such as Visualforce Lightning Components map into the model view controller pattern? If these are the provided answers, you can say, well, the Visualforce and Lightning Components map to the view, Apex maps to the controller, and SQL is a way to retrieve data from the model. Another sample topic is what are the common use cases and limitations for declarative customization tools, such as workflow validations, formulas, and processes. Here are two very good links to study up on when to use and what are the limitations of each. Please feel free to take a screenshot. All right, so that's it for Salesforce fundamentals. We're moving on to data modeling and management, which is a separate section, accounts for around 12% of the exam. So let's start with the data modeling. You may be given a question on, given these are the business requirements, determine the data model. To answer the question accurately, you need to know how to create custom objects, how to create custom fields and which field types to use and when to use relationships and which relationships to use. For example, when to use a master detail versus a lookup. You also need to know what is a junction object and when to use it, as well as which field types to use and when and where to use record types. Specifically for field types, you also need to know roll-up summary fields to aggregate a field on unrelated records, and you also need to know formula fields and the limits around each. Okay, you may also get a question or two on the schema builder. Just know that it is very good for looking up relationships between different objects and adding and removing fields. Now, one thing to watch out for is whichever fields you add in the schema builder are not going to automatically show up on the page layout. So to add fields to the page layout that you added from the schema builder, you still need to go to the object manager for that. All right, let's move on to data management, which is importing data and exporting data. So in this slide, we have three wizards. We have the data import wizard, we have the data export wizard, and we have a Salesforce developer wizard, Brian Kwong. Now, for the purposes of the exam, you need to only know about the data import wizard and the data export wizard, specifically when to use either and when to use the data loader instead. So data loader is separate. You install it separately. You can use it through the UI and or API. Why would you use it? If you want to automate your data import or export through the CLI, you can use the data loader. You can also use data loader to connect to a database, and you can also import or export more data with data loader. So the data import wizard and data export wizard, you have a limit of 50,000 records. With data loader, the upper limit is 5 million records. So you just need to know when to use data import wizard, when to use data export wizard, and when to use data loader. All right, now we are going to the biggest section of the exam. Logic and process automation is a whopping 46%. So I'm just going to cover half of it and let Alba do the rest. All right, so logic and process automation includes some declarative tools, but also Apex. Specifically, in Apex, you need to know how to write Apex classes. Here is the official documentation, bit.ly/Apex developer guide. So for Apex classes, you need to know which access modifier to use, whether to use public, private, or when to not use a modifier at all. What are the interfaces? How does casting work for objects and fields? What is a namespace prefix and when to use it? What is pass by value versus pass by reference? How do you work with S objects in Apex? How do you retrieve them? How do you use them to retrieve metadata? For example, how to get the name of a profile of the account records owner. And lastly, you need to know how exceptions are used in Apex and how to extend out-of-the-box exceptions. All right, you also need to know how to retrieve data in Apex, specifically know how to use SAQL and SASO, and know when to use SAQL versus SASO. For example, if you already know which object you're going to query the fields from, you can use SAQL. You may use the dynamic version of SAQL if you have a dynamic object API name, or if the field that you're querying for is dynamic. On the other hand, if you're querying for a text value across multiple text fields across multiple objects, do use SASO, and remember there's a dynamic version for that as well. Next, we are going to talk about DML operations, so data manipulation language. Whenever you're modifying data in the database, this can include upserts, updates, deletes, and so on. Specifically, we're going to clarify what does it mean to bulkify code. So here we have a good example of bulkified code. You can see there's contacts, the list of contacts, and we're looping through them, but we're not calling DML within the list. We call the DML after we modified the contacts list. So this is bulkified code because we call DML outside of a loop after we've done all the modifications we needed to. You also need to know when to use the static versus the dynamic version of DML. So the dynamic DML gives you more power because you can allow partial processing. So for example, in the bottom right hand side, you can see there's a code snippet. So even if the account list, if some of the records in there do not get successfully inserted, the transaction will still go through because we have that all or none flag set to false. But if we just used insert account list, all of that transaction will fail. All right, so continuing on with logic and process automation, you also need to know how to use Apex triggers, specifically how to write basic triggers. A very basic question will ask you, okay, which of these answers is the correct trigger signature? So you need to know like which order of the words go in the trigger signature. Like where does the trigger name go and object API name and so on. Secondly, you need to know how Apex triggers can create unintended recursion. An example is if you have a trigger that is triggered on an update, it creates a child record, and the creation of child record may then trigger another trigger or workflow rule or whichever process to then trigger the original account update. So then you can see that it goes into an unintended recursion. Not only do you need to know how triggers can create unintended recursion, you also need to know how to untangle those recursions. Please refer to bit.ly/apex trigger best practices to see how you can debug and how you can make sure that your trigger is only called once. Okay, so the biggest question in logic and process automation, and this will come in different forms. The biggest question is when to use Apex versus declarative tools. So again, you do not need to be an expert in declarative tools. You just need to know what their use cases and limitations are. So Apex is much more powerful than many declarative tools. With Apex, you can easily delete records, update unrelated records, share records, add remove users, and create email templates. And that's just some of the things that Apex can do. However, the best practice is usually to use declarative tools whenever possible. Why? Because code is just harder to maintain. Not only do you need to write Apex, but since you're developing on the platform, you also need to have at least 75% test coverage for Apex in order to deploy it, which means even more code to maintain. So the best practice is to use declarative tools whenever possible.
Thank you, Annie. So I will continue with this logic and process automation topic, which we said is the bigger one. One thing you need to know about regarding this topic is how transaction order of execution behaves in Salesforce. If you build declarative processes with lightning flow, process builder, or workflow rules, how those declarative processes interact with your Apex triggers and your Apex code. You need to be aware of which governor limits you can hit in the platform. For example, CPU time limit, DML limits, software limits, etc. and not only know when these governor limits can be hit, but also how to solve that problem. Normally in the exam, you are going to have questions that show a piece of code in which a governor limit is being hit, and you have to propose a solution. Probably if you are hitting too many DML statements, you will have to bulkify that code. Or for example, if you are hitting a CPU time limit exceeded limit, you may want to optimize your queries or use maps. Also, you need to know how transactions behave if governor limits are hit. Know that the full transaction is rolled back and that nothing is saved in the database. Another subtopic about logic and process automation is security. You need to know which security vulnerabilities may affect your Apex and Visualforce code and how to prevent them. So for example, you need to know how to enforce object level security, record level security, and field level security in the platform and how that works in Visualforce pages. And also be aware of how to prevent some application security vulnerabilities, as for example, SOQL injection. Know how to encode the user supplied input before passing it into a query. So finishing with logic and process automation, the next topic I want to talk about is user interface. We're going to have a 10% of questions regarding user interface in the exam. For that, first, I want to clarify a bit the situation regarding UI technologies in the platform and in the exam. In 2006, Visualforce was the UI technology released by Salesforce, and this is the most extended UI technology at the moment in our platform. In 2014, the Lightning Component Framework was released together with the Aura Components programming model. And this year, in 2019, we had the Lightning Web Components programming model presented. I've highlighted Lightning Web Components in red because at the moment, we don't have any questions regarding Lightning Web Components in the exam. But we will probably include some questions in the future. So what is important to call out here is that you should make sure to to check the exam guide at the moment in which you are going to sit for the exam, because we change the exam on every release. Another thing that I want to call out about Lightning is that the credentialing team, this is a very forward-looking statement, are considering as well, apart from updating the current developer certification, creating a new Lightning developer credential. But as I say, this is very forward-looking at the moment. So mainly, in the exam, you are going to be asked about Visualforce regarding user interface. So you need to know how to write Visualforce pages, how to use standard controllers, how to use extension controllers, and how to use custom controllers. You need to know how to reference Salesforce data in those Visualforce pages. So if you are using a standard controller, that is going to be pretty straightforward. But for example, if you are using an extension or custom controller, you need to know how to write those in Apex, how to construct them, how to write properties, how to write getters and setters, how to return page reference to navigate. You also need to know how to configure your Visualforce pages so that they can be used in the different Salesforce experiences. So for example, if you are going to use a Visualforce page in a standard layout of a specific record, you may want to implement a standard controller. Or for example, if you are going to use a Visualforce page to perform an override of a list or tab standard action, then you will need to implement a standard list controller. So all these things is what you are going to be asked about in the exam. And there's a small portion of questions about Lightning. Okay, but as I say, no Lightning Web Components for now. And what you need to know about Lightning is first, which are the benefits of the Lightning component framework at high level. So understand that this is a new framework in which you are able to build components so that an admin can use those components in App Builder to build pages, for example, and that those components are going to communicate using events. And the second thing that you need to know is a bit about our component. So for example, typical questions would be example in which you have to use resources of the overall component bundle. So you need to know, for example, where do you need to place the CSS code, or where do you need to place the HTML code or the JavaScript code. Next topic I want to talk about is testing. You are going to have a 12% of questions in the exam regarding testing. You need to know which are the benefits of unit testing in the platform. Indeed, there is a 75% of code coverage requirement for your Apex code. So that's something that you need to know very well. And not only how to write unit tests for coverage, but also how to write proper unit tests. Unit tests that test for all the possible use cases as positive, negative, nulls, etc. You will need to know how data persistency works when you execute unit tests and how that differs from when you execute production code, for example, and also how permissions are enforced when executing unit tests. Also, you will need to know how to create test data for unit tests, the different ways in which we can do that. Know how to use the test setup annotation, know how to load test data using a static resource, etc. You need to be familiar with the different ways that we have in the platform to execute unit tests. So for example, if you are using the developer console, which are the different options that you can configure in the developer console for test execution, or for example, how to execute tests from the setup menu and from any of our APIs. And the final topic I'm going to cover is debug and deployment tools. This topic is going to cover 10% of the certification, and it can be divided in two main topics, in two main subtopics, sorry. So first one is debugging. You need to know how to set up debug logs so that you can record user interactions and so that you can add debug statements to your Apex code. And also, which are the main features of the developer console to work with debug logs. So for example, how to open logs, which are the different perspectives, how to filter by the different log levels, etc. And the second subtopic in debug and deployment tools is deployment. I want also to clarify the situation about this because we have a couple of tools with which we can do deployment at the moment. So at the beginning, we had change sets. We had the force.com migration tool, which is basically the Ant tooling. We had force.com IDE and Workbench. Workbench is kind of unofficial, so we are not asking questions about Workbench anymore in the certification exam. And force.com IDE is being retired. So again, you don't have to study anything about force.com IDE or Workbench. In 2017, the Salesforce CLI was released as part of the Salesforce developer experience. At the moment, we don't have questions about the Salesforce CLI in the certification, but same that with Lightning Web Components, this is something that might be included in the next releases. So make sure to always check the exam guide. So basically, what you need to know about debug and deployment tools is which are the options to deploy and retrieve metadata using change sets and using force.com migration tool, and also how the different environments are used for development. If you are a consultant, you are probably using sandboxes. And if you are an ISV, for example, you will probably be using developer orgs. So you need to know the different capabilities of the different orgs and how to compare them and when to choose the good one for your use case. So now we have finished going through all the topics of the exam, and we are going to see some sample questions. Let's say that I find this question in the exam. What should a developer do to update a picklist field on related opportunity records when a modification to the associated account record is detected? The question is asking which is the best way to modify child opportunity records when an account is modified. So we have A, create a workflow rule with a field update. B, create a Visualforce page. C, create a Lightning component. D, create a process with Process Builder. I don't have any idea.
Well, Alva, we just went over some links, and there was a link build.ly/which automation tool, which you have open over there. I can see. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's multiple declarative options. So, for example, process builder, workflow, and so on.
Okay, that's great. So here I'm going to check if I can do it with workflows. And I see that in workflows, I can update fields, but only from the record or its parent. So that is not going to solve my problem. However, if I check the Process Builder column, I can see that with Process Builder, I can perform field updates on any related record. So thank you so much, Annie, because that must be the response. But I have a question, because I think I could do the same with Visualforce pages or Lightning components. Can't I?
Yes, you definitely can, Alba. However, as we just mentioned, it is good to use the declarative solution instead of a code one because code is harder to maintain. And
Annie?
whatever we're building on the platform, it automatically gets updated with each release. So that's much more maintainable over the long run.
Annie?
Yes, Alba. I just said it's more maintainable to go with a declarative solution.
Annie?
Alba, are you there?
Okay, sorry. I have an issue with my connection, I think. Okay, so were you able to read the next question?
Yes, I can read the next question. Okay. So
Okay.
the next question is, a developer creates a workflow rule that changes the value of a field on an object. An Apex after update trigger exists for the object. What happens when a user updates the record? Is it A, the Apex trigger is fired more than once, B, the workflow rule is fired more than once, or C, no changes are made to the data, or D, both the Apex trigger and the workflow rule are fired only once? This is a tricky one. How would you approach it, Alba?
Okay, so I share a resource at the beginning of the presentation explaining how the transaction order of execution behaves in Salesforce, but I don't like memorizing, so I have a better idea. So what I have done is to, in an org, try to reproduce the use case that we were trying to, that we were seeing in the question. So here I have created a workflow rule for accounts. The workflow rule is going to update the rating of the account to hot if the employee number is bigger than 1,000 once the account is created or updated. And I've also created a trigger. I've added a couple of debug logs because first I want to see how many times the trigger is fired to be able to answer the question. And I have added here another debug log, because what I'm going to do in the trigger is that when the account rating is hot, because the workflow rule has changed it, for example, I'm going to append something else to the account name so that the salesperson can see very quickly that this is a hot account. So let's try this. If I come here, for example, I have an account which number of employees is less than 1,000. So let's increment this employee number and see what happens. So here we can see that the workflow rule has set the rating to hot, and the trigger has appended this to the name of the account. And what we can do here is also to examine the debug logs and check that effectively my trigger was fired twice. So this is great because I didn't have to memorize and I have the response for the question.
Yeah, that's awesome, Alba. Yeah, getting hands-on is a great way to learn. Now let's move on to exam tips. There's two ways to take the exams. You can take it online or you can take it on site. Either way, it's the same way to register. You can register in Web Assessor by going to that link, webassessor.com/salesforce. And whichever way you decide to take it, the web interface is going to be the same. Here's a screenshot. You can see that you can always mark a question for later review, which is very helpful. Now, what is different? When you're going on to an on-site, you do need to bring your ID because the testing proctor will check that you are who you say you are. You'll also leave your things in a locker, so leave all your backpacks, electronics, jackets. You're only allowed to take yourself to the exam. Now, the testing center will provide pencil and paper. This is different. This is different from taking the exam online. However, you can, after using the pencil and paper during the exam, they will ask for those back, so you cannot keep them. And also, there's no breaks during the exam, so please do whatever you need to do before the exam. During the exam, breathe, relax. You can draw solutions on your paper. You can mark the questions to come back to. Remember, you have 110 minutes. So if you finish the questions early, you can look at the summary over here, and you can see there's a asterisk around the questions that either you marked to come back to or you have not yet answered. So just pace yourself. You can always go back to the questions. Now, what I like to do is I like to think about the solutions before I look at the answers, because looking at the answers prematurely sometimes just confuses me, because some answers are very similar to each other, especially when they're answers about code. And lastly, look at all multiple choice answers, because again, if they look very similar, it really pays to do the extra scrutiny to make sure that you're answering with the right answer.
Well, so in my case, I did all my exams online, so I can give you some specific tips if you are going to tackle the exam online. The registration process is almost the same one. You have to register in Web Assessor, but you are going to go through a biometrical identification. Web Assessor is going to take a photo of you so that in the day of the exam, they can check that you are the person who registered. My recommendation is that you make sure that your background is clear, because I had some problems with that. Then you have to install a software called Sentinel. This is the software that you are going to use to tackle the exam, and somebody is going to be watching you, supervising that everything is correct while you do the exam in this software. One thing that you can do in advance is a software test. There's an option in the Sentinel software, and in this software test, some things are going to be checked, as for example, if your internet connection speed is enough to do the exam. Apart from the software, you will need an external webcam and a microphone. The webcam needs to be external webcam because the supervisor needs to be able to see your keyboard, your hands, your screen, and your face. So that's needed. And the microphone can be the internal microphone from the laptop. In the day of the exam, when you launch the exam, you are going to go through the biometrical identification check first. This is the web assessor is going to check that you are the person who registered at the beginning. You should have nothing on the table, no pen, no paper. This is different from the on-site exam, as Annie mentioned. No mobile phone, anything. And it's not allowed to talk. So for example, you shouldn't try to read your questions aloud. If the supervisor detects that something is wrong, the exam will stop. If the exam stops, don't panic, breathe. The time clock will stop too, so that's not counting towards the exam time. And there's a chat that you can use to communicate with the supervisor and fix whatever is wrong. Once you fix what's wrong, sometimes something in the table or what I mentioned about talking, you can continue with the exam as normal. Here, I leave you some links that will explain the process much better. So now, after the webinar, which are the next steps that you need to follow? What I recommend you to do is to first download the exam guide, go through all the topics, and try to identify in which topics you need to work more. If you want some extra help, we have some official courses in Trailhead Academy that you can sign for. The first one is called Programmatic Development Using Apex and Visualforce in Learning Experience. And this is a 5-day instructor-led course that you can do in person in one of our Salesforce offices or online, and that has a cost. The second one, Certification Preparation for Platform Developer 1, is a 1-day virtual course. And this one is free. So I strongly recommend you to try to register for this one. Apart from that, in that certification preparation training, you are going to get a voucher of $70 discount for the certification exam or for the retake. So I recommend you to register in that one. Then you have several resources in Trailhead that you can use. We have an official Platform Developer 1 preparation trial mix that you can do. And also we have the Apex Specialist Super Batch that covers some of the content that we have seen today. And I have also some forward-looking information about an upcoming Platform Developer 1 certification preparation trail. This is going to be a trail in Trailhead with some practice questions divided by the topic of the exam that you can use to assess, to train, and to assess that you are prepared for the exam. At the beginning, I talked about the benefits of becoming certified. One of the benefits was connecting to other developers. You can do that in several ways. So one of the ways is do it in person. There are more than 1,000 Trailblazer community groups around the world. So you can try to find one in your city. And if you don't find one in your city, you can always set up one. So take note of that link. And you can join any of our online communities, the developer community or the partner community. So I sit for the exam and I passed. Now what? Well, first, congratulations. You're certified. You are going to receive by email your credential ID and some logos that you can use in your social profiles. You can update your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your CV, etc. And you will have to maintain your certification with every release. The good news is that certifications are now maintained in Trailhead. Before, you had to do an exam on each release and you had to pay every year, but now everything is on Trailhead, everything is free. You are going to have a module that summarizes what's relevant for the certification that you are trying to renew in that release. for example, the Platform Developer 1 in our case, and you have to do a test in Trailhead, and that's it. You can also contribute with the credentialing program in 2 ways. The first way will be to give feedback about your certification exam. For example, if you felt that a question was too difficult or it wasn't clear enough. And the other way is to register for a beta exam. So I leave you there a link that you can follow to do all of that. And finally, you can think about getting the next certification. Probably you will think about getting the Platform Developer 2, but also if you are a declarative guy, the App Builder is related. And worth to mention that the Platform Developer 1 certification is the only certification that sits on both sides of the architect pyramid. So it's interesting also if you are going through that path.
Alrighty. Now, what happens if you do not pass? It has happened to me before. Now what? Well, first thing to know is do not despair because you can schedule another exam. Not only that, but the retake is only half of the price. So instead of the full $200, you only pay $100 plus tax. And yes, there is a further discount if you take the Trailhead Academy course. The discount will also work toward the retake. Another really good thing about taking the exam, even if it's not your first time taking it, is every time you take the exam, regardless if you pass or fail, you will get an email detailing how well you did on the exam. Not only that, it will be broken down by the section. So for example, it will say you got 33% on data modeling and manipulation, or you got 90% on logic and process automation. So if you know those scores, then you know where to focus your studying efforts. So another thing that's very fun with studying, I find, is if you don't pass the first time, it's a very good call to join the Trailblazer community. There's over 1,000 of them worldwide. You can join a local one, you can join a remote one, you can start one. It's very fun to study with others because a lot of people are also going through the same certification process. Lastly, getting hands-on, as Alba demonstrated, is the best way to learn. Specifically, we suggested the Trail Mix and the Super Badge. So these are all of the exam tips and tricks, and we look forward to you passing the exam. Now we're opening up the questions.
Great. So as promised, we will answer a few questions that you all have asked during this webinar. Okay, the first question is for Belinda. How do you take beta tests? Do we pay for it?
Yes, thanks. To take a beta test, the exam is actually free. There's a few steps in the process. We socialize the beta exams that will be coming out via our Trailblazer community. So watch for those, and via that is a survey that you would complete to indicate that you're interested in taking the beta. We select from the respondents and then notify you if you've been selected. And at that point, you're able to sign up in WebAssessor and take the exam while it's offered.
Great, thank you, Belinda. And then we have another question regarding retakes for you. How many retakes are allowed?
Well, this is an area that has recently changed. We publish our retake policy on the Trailhead site, so just search for that if you want to look it up in detail. You can search for certification exam retake policy, and you should find it. You are allowed 3 retakes per exam release. That corresponds with the Salesforce winter, spring, and summer release cycle. So if you fail your first attempt, you just need to wait a day and then you can try again. However, if you fail the second attempt as well, then you need to wait 14 days before trying for a third time. And hopefully you would pass at this point, but if not, after your third attempt, that is the end of your retries during that release cycle, and you need to wait until the next release of the exam before registering again.
Great, thank you, Belinda. Alba, the next question is for you. Do you actually need to know, next question actually. Alba, this one is for you. What is data persistency and permission enforcement? Could you elaborate that more?
Sure. So data persistency refers to the fact that when you execute unit tests, if you are creating records, for example, in those unit tests, that is not going to persist in the database with the default see all data false configuration of the unit test class. And permission enforcement refers to the fact that when you run unit tests, those will run as the current root or with the current unit running user permissions. But you can change that because there is a method which is system.runAs, for which you can select a different user with different permissions.
Great, thank you. And another question for you, Alba. Do you actually need to know the actual current values of governor limits in Salesforce or just the kinds of limits?
I remember from memory that from a certification exam, I got one question in which I had to remember that. But if you are a developer, you already know that those limits, because, for example, you know the 100 SQL limit query, and you know the 150 DML operations limits. So those are the two that I remember that you had to remember, but I'm sure that you already knew about those limits if you have been a developer for some time.
Great, thank you, Alba. Belinda, the next question is for you. Do you have any recommendations for mock exams for Platform Developer 1 besides Trailhead?
Thank you. Actually, we do not. We do recommend you use the official Salesforce content that's available for preparation, a lot of which is on Trailhead or through Instruction and Learning. The problem with going and looking at other sources is you're likely to find sites that are posting Salesforce proprietary and confidential information. They're actually stealing our exam questions. So therefore, those are not to be used. Sharing of our confidential data or using it is actually a violation of the agreement that you accept at the beginning of a certification exam. And your certification can be revoked for following those practices. So based on all of that, and that we don't really know what's reputable out there and what is not, we recommend that you just use the techniques and tricks that we've highlighted here in this presentation, a lot of resources that we've pointed out, such as Trailhead and our product docs, and real hands-on practice using the orgs that are available to skill up and practice for your exam.
Thank you for answering that one, Belinda. Annie, the next question is for you. Which one is a better option, on-site exam or online exam?
Thanks for the question. So the question is, which is better, online or on site? Well, I've taken all of my exams on site because there's a testing center very close to where I live and also happens to be close to the office. And now Alba has taken hers online. So it really depends. I mean, with on site, you basically dedicate more part of your day because you need to travel, you need to make sure that during that time you're not disturbed. So it's more of an investment up front. But you do have the pencil and paper, and that is quite nice. With your online exam, I've heard that you can take that faster and you can do things like take notes after the exam has ended. So it's up to the person.
Great, thank you for answering that one, Annie. Belinda, another question for you. I want to know how much Visualforce is included in the exams.
Thanks for that question. The best way to see what's represented always is to go to the exam guide that is available on Trailhead. That is always kept current, so you want to make sure you're checking the latest version There are Visualforce objectives listed within there, so you can look specifically at the skills that we will be testing around Visualforce. What we find too, that platform developers are going out in the field and they need to support what exists there. And since Visualforce is our most extended technology at the moment, it's important that we still test on those skills. But they are maintained and updated on a regular basis. So always, again, check that exam guide to see the current Visualforce representation.
Great, thank you. Alba, this next question is for you. I missed the part about the $70 voucher. Is that from completing the Super Badge or the Trail Mix?
Not really. This $70 voucher, you get it if you register for one of the Trailblazer Academy courses, specifically the one that is called Certification Preparation for Platform Developer 1. And this course is free and it's online. So you can register, tackle the course, and get the $70 voucher probably in an easy way because you don't have to travel to any place and it's free. So it's for everyone.
Great, thank you, Alba. Belinda, we have a question for you. You mentioned that 65% is a passing score. Is there a minimal percent per each section needed for a pass?
No, there is not. 65% is across the entire exam with all sections represented equally. You do not have to pass any given section at a given score.
Great, thank you. And another question for you, Belinda. How many days are given for completing the maintenance exam? And what happens if the maintenance exam is not done at the given time?
Now that all of our maintenance exams are on Trailhead, you have an entire Salesforce release cycle to complete your maintenance. Our different certifications have different maintenance requirements. For Platform Developer 1, currently you need to maintain it 3 times a year, so that's within each Salesforce release cycle. So you have that period of time to take that release module on Trailhead, and then that maintains your certification. We send a lot of reminders at the end of the window to make sure people get out there and get that done. If for some reason you don't get it done, your credential, your certification does expire. So you would need to go through a process through support to try to reactivate that. So it's important. Don't let your hard work, your hard-earned credential expire. Just get into Trailhead and keep up on that maintenance. You can do that the minute the module launches, and then you have it out of your way for that entire cycle until the next one is out.
Thanks, Belinda. And we have time for one last question. For an average person, how many hours of preparation will it take to prepare for this exam? Annie, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so the hours of preparation will definitely depend on how much experience you have developing on the Lightning platform. So as Alba mentioned, for someone who's already very experienced, who knows the governance limits inside and out, it should not be that hard. Maybe just look through the exam guide and maybe 1 to 2 hours just to look up some parts that you may not be very familiar with, and you're good to go. For someone who's relatively new, though, it could take a few weeks, but that will depend again on the individual.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions, to all of our panelists for answering them and for today's presentation. If we weren't able to get to your question, please tweet all of our panelists. We will be sharing the recording and the deck with you within 48 hours. And then finally, just a quick reminder to share your feedback with us so we can make our future webinars even better. You will see a pop-up for a survey at the end of the webinar. And that concludes today's webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you for more of our webinars soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.